research and the stringency that goes into research does not apply directly to the classroom. And so I could come up with great ideas and great perspective and great intervention, and to use those in the classroom is difficult because you can't really emulate the same environment, the same variables in the classroom because it's just not possible. And so I think that's a big reason. But what I'm noticing is that things like Common Core, things like RTI, things like this essential schools or small schools model, I feel like those are research ideas that have come up, since the 70s. I mean, and I could name off a ton of references that discuss the idea about those ideas, about providing specific and individualized instruction, that talk about, the different types of instructional levels, the different instructional areas, and what to focus on. So, though, again, how much does university research guide, those processes? Well, I think we all would hope, that research in higher education, those models are going to drive some of those policies. But what I'm starting to notice is that policymakers and lawmakers are finding these interesting things that pop up. Like, for example, in Nebraska, how we just talked about insurance covering the counseling, or not counseling, but therapy, for students with autism or individuals diagnosed with autism. I'm from New York. We've been doing that for a long time. Insurance companies have been supporting that practice. And as a matter of fact, most of the therapy that's done through private agencies is IEP driven. So my point, though, is I think policymakers really, and state lawmakers really do drive that process. And I guess for some of you, or most of you, that's probably a yes, obviously. But for me, it's awakening to see those two worlds colliding. So as I was doing the research for the Common Core and looking at the different areas of reform that are coming up, and I'm not going to lie, as a matter of fact, it was through part of the other class I'm taking, which I'm not sure how many of you are taking 854 at the same time, but through the activity I just had to do for that class, just talked about Common Core and the impact it has on us at a state level. What's interesting to me, again, it's the money trail that I've noticed, even through the reading of the text for both classes. I've noticed that money trail leads us down a particular direction, and you can see the reform occurring through that process. Again, see the reform we just had for students diagnosed with autism. I mean, that's money driven. That's really, we could talk about, it's for the students, and I agree. I think it's great for kids. I think the students are going to need that level of therapy for them, especially early on. But at the same time, it was insurance and money driven, and, funding for state driven. So, like I mentioned earlier, talking about the Common Core, how much of that is, state versus federal? The Common Core, the individuals that are supporting that are obviously governmental state-issued people. But, for example, and I'm just looking up here the name for this particular grant from the federal government. Oh, where is it? Sorry. Race to the Top. Here we go. And before doing the research for this, I had never heard of this. But Race to the Top program, federally funded grant for schools, $4 billion. And they specifically, and what I mean by they is the corestandards.com people talking about myth versus fact, specifically address the question of, did the Common Core, or do the Common Core standards, relate to the fact that there's this program where you can, apply to get this funding? And they say no, of course. Specifically, they say, recognizing the strengths of having high standards for all students, which is the motto of the Common Core, the federal government gave competitive advantage to the Race to the Top applicants that demonstrated they had a plan to adopt college and career-ready standards for all students. So the idea that that's what Race to the Top is set, is like you've hit these standards. My question is, haven't we always had standards? I mean, haven't we always set the goal of here's what we're trying to achieve in high school and above? It says the program did not specify the Common Core or prevent states from creating their own separate college to career ready standards. Here's the deal. Of course, they didn't say that. They never said you have to use Common Core. But if you have a package ready to go and you adopt that package that you do not have to recreate, and you can easily adapt it and then also apply for that grant, if you're a school, for example, that doesn't achieve AYP regularly, how simple is that? You know, on a very, very similar, but not necessarily related, comparison, think about those of us in elementary school that use Dibbles. Dibbles is a great tool. Super, super minute, snapshot of a student's reading ability. But it's packaged, it's ready, it's there, there's standards, and they're great standards, and they're well researched. I'm not saying that. But of course we're going to adopt those. And most schools who do RTI adopt those. Now, could you create your own curriculum-based measurement, CBM, if you're not familiar with that term? You could. You could use almost any literature-based, program and create your own curricular measures. But of course you're not going to, because why wouldn't you use Dibbles? So if you're attempting to get this grant or any type of funding similar to that, and you have the Common Core there to utilize, why wouldn't you? Why wouldn't you utilize the Common Core? Now, interesting couple of facts I looked as I was doing research. The website, the big part of the website I used was 247wallstreet.com. They did a lot of reporting on state funding, a lot of reporting on AYP, graduation rate. So I got a lot of data from them just to look at, okay, what's the effect of this Common Core? What's interesting to me is, wow, that's embarrassing. When looking at 20 states who received the most funding from the federal government, so the top 20 receiving federal government, all but four, Maryland, Wyoming, Montana, and Rhode Island, all four of them fall within the states who either A, and maybe multiple ones, but either A, spend the least on education. So they get the most funding, and it wasn't necessarily funding that was just earmarked for education. I should, maybe specific of that. It's overall federal funding. But out of those 20 states, 16 of them fall into the category of either A, spending the least on education, B, having not made adequate yearly progress over the last 3 years, or C, have one of the lowest graduation rates in the country. 16 out of the 20 who have received the most funding federally from the government. So, where's the money going? How's it being used? Obviously. Now, in comparison, mostly out of curiosity, I wanted to look at Nebraska, And, Nebraska receives the 14th worst return per tax dollar. So when you're talking about how much funding we're getting as a state, we get the 14th worst return. So our dollar doesn't go as far as, say, some of those top 20 that I mentioned earlier. So we're not getting that much money from the government, essentially. We have the 5th best graduation rate in the country. Now, again, as a researcher myself, coming from that background, I get it. There's a lot of, confounding variables there. How many people are in your state? I mean, I remember moving back from Nebraska to New York and jokingly made a comparison on a website about how the Nebraska's, I think it was theft, if I remember correctly, versus New York's was worse. Well, of course, that was per capita, and so, 6 thefts versus 6,000 thefts is going to be, the percentage is higher because there's not as many people. So I don't understand this part of that. But again, 14th worst return on our tax dollars, 5th best graduation rate in the country, and approximately, give or take, 70% of our Nebraska schools have achieved AYP, and we are in the top 20 for amount spent per student on education. So we take our money and we use it, hopefully, in the direction that we think is necessary for education. So, I think it's just, I think we have to be cautious about the reforms that come through. I think we have to be questioning how they happen, why they're happening, and, our motto at our school, and it's actually on the wall where our superintendent and the Board of Education meet, says, is it good for students? Is it good for kids? Because, Nebraska hasn't adopted Common Core. I don't know exactly why or why not. I couldn't tell you that. I probably, if I would have researched it, maybe could have found a little bit more out. But I tell you what, we're doing pretty good. We're doing okay. And, I think we need to be cautious about, how we adopt some of those reforms. Going back up to when we were talking about the Coalition of Essential Schools, I mean, I think the tenets that they try to apply are great. Applying goals to all students, of course. I don't see why you wouldn't do that. Personalized teaching and learning, great. It's when an example of that is when I have questions from teachers about students who are identified or not identified for special education, and they're asking questions like, well, I think they're spelling, I give them 20 spelling words and it's not really working very well. How do I adjust that? And can I give them less, but I only give less to kids who are identified? I'm thinking, no, that's fine. You don't have to be identified to modify a spelling list and then, grow from there. So you give them 10 words. Can they learn the 10 words and do they do better? Okay. Then you give them 12 words, then you give them 15 words. I mean, so doing what's best for kids is never a question. It's never a question of identification, not a question about reform or not reform. You just do the best you can for students. And so, when we've talked about in the past about the idea of vocational education for high school students, I actually, after writing the paper regarding that topic, went and talked to my school counselor, and we talked a lot about what that looks like for our kids at our school, which my school is a higher achieving school district. So with that in consideration, but we still give them the opportunity to get into those fields of, what's the word, that they're of interest, excuse me, and for career-oriented issues. So, I think we're headed in the right direction. Again, I think we just need to be cautious. And I think we'll do well for kids as long as we try to embrace what's best for them. So, thank you. I think I was fairly on topic. So, let me know. Give me some feedback. Thank you.